Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I was right, it was beautiful yesterday and it's perfect today, so we must be in Brisbane and in this excellent auditorium. So welcome to this first morning of our annual conference, the ANZSOG annual conference. I'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this facility is built, the juncture and Frugal people, and honour their elders past and present. I should also, right here at the beginning, acknowledge the conference partners who've played an important role, as they do every year, in producing this event. The principal partner this year is the Institute of Chartered Accountants Australia. And those of you who had a coffee on the way in, you'll know how important it is that Griffith University has been our partner in producing the conference program and getting that coffee cart operating up there. I had mine at about 6 o'clock, otherwise I wouldn't be here right now. We had KPMG also sponsoring the Patterson oration last night by Glenn Davis, and many of you will have had the opportunity to go to that, and the welcome reception that the Brisbane City Council put on for us at City Hall. I'd also acknowledge our supporting partners, the Griffith Review, ANZSOG alumni, an important group of people, and IPAA. Well, it's a real pleasure for me as incoming Dean, replacing Alan Fells, who's still a professor with ANZSOG, but for this, my first conference, to be here in Brisbane, and on this particular topic, performance under pressure, delivering under pressure. Like the previous topics for previous conferences, it's very timely and it responds to the current preoccupations of government, because I don't think there's any doubt about the pressure right now. In Australia, we've gone from the challenges of how to spend vast sums of money in response to the global financial crisis, to the challenges of dealing with the severe fiscal consequences of that response. And that's been made, I think, a little bit harder by the habits and some of the expectations that have come about from this recent period of relatively big spending itself. So, while we've only recently and suddenly embraced austerity, as it's being called, it's clear that that is here to stay. I think sometimes the term is being used to imply that some of the actions of government are excessive or overreactions, but there's no doubt that the fiscal problems behind the austerity measures that we're observing and will continue to observe are big, and they won't be resolved quickly. And I don't think they'll be resolved either in the old accustomed ways of trimming a little bit across the board, the efficiency dividends that sort of started small and gets bigger. And while you can understand the attraction of an efficiency dividend to government, they can have perverse effects, and they're fairly undiscriminating in terms of where they're cutting across the public sector and public services. And I think an increasing recognition of that and of the ongoing challenges that we face has led to a consideration of more fundamental questions about what government's roles and responsibilities should be. On the what questions, what to do, as much as the how questions, how to do them most cost effectively. So I really do think we're at a critical juncture in government and in public administration, and not just in Australia but internationally, where new modes and scopes of public governance need to be considered, and where we have to have a departure, I think, from previous ways of thinking about government, the nature of government and the role and reach of government, and how government goes about its business. But I think it's very unlikely that we're going to go back to small government, if there ever was such a thing. I think the expectations of the public and political inclinations are against that. So the imperative really is to be doing more with less. I know that's become a bit of a cliche, but lip service has been paid to that cliche, if you like, whereas I think in the future it's going to become the lived reality of all of us. And it's going to reach out to policies, to programs and their design and how they're administered, all directed at enhancing the performance of government, including the productivity of the public sector. Well, productivity has traditionally been seen as a concept for the private sector, not the public sector. It's almost been seen as alien to the way we do business in the public sector. And at one level you can understand why people think that delivering public value to the community is a fairly subtle and complicated business, perhaps more subtle and more complicated than just making money. But the essence of productivity, getting more value out of the resources available, is clearly just as important in the public sector as it is in the private sector. And indeed, you could argue that it's even more important in the public sector because we're spending other people's money, we're spending taxpayers' money, and it's absolutely crucial that they can see that there's value commensurate with the sacrifice that they're making through taxation. And I guess it's never been more important really than right now that we can put a focus on productivity in the public sector, as well as the wider notions of performance. But when you look at the drivers of productivity from the analysis of productivity performance in the private sector, they come mainly from innovation within organisations and within programs, and from better performers replacing worse performers. And these are very challenging, particularly the latter, when you start to think about the public sector. Incentive systems in the public sector are very different to the incentive systems in the private sector, but those incentive systems are crucial to performance and the productivity of the activities within, whether it's the public or the private sectors. So how can we improve productivity? How can we do more with less rather than just less with less, which is the looming threat, I think? How can we foster innovation? Which areas are the most promising areas? How can we ensure that cuts that occur in spending within public administration occur in areas that are adding least value rather than ones that are adding most value for the community? And how do we know when we're getting that right? And how do we know when we're doing better? The whole question of measurement is quite a complicated and difficult one in this area, but one that needs to be tackled. Because it's ultimately about ensuring that the community benefits from the actions that are occurring, that we can not only maintain services and maintain community well-being that depends on those services, but also enhance them. So these are the issues, the really important issues that are going to be addressed in this conference for 2013. I think the importance of them and the recognition of that is reflected in the attendance at the conference. It's not just the beautiful weather in Brisbane. The conference itself has been structured to provide practical insights in the key areas, the key areas of what and how. And to help us with that, as always at ANZSOG annual conferences, we have a range of authorities, experts from Australia and internationally, and from academia and from public administration. Well, the themes for the conference have been outlined in John Wanner's excellent background paper, but rather than plagiarise John, having read through it all again, my cut on those themes in perhaps slightly folksier language is the following. I see about, like him, about 6 themes that we're going to be working through during the conference. And I suppose the first one is never waste a crisis. That austerity is challenging, and some see it as a threat, but you can also see it as an opportunity, as a springboard to better serve the public, to find ways of doing things that might have been harder to pull off in more affluent times or more tolerant times. The second theme is about frugal innovation, innovation that pays as much attention to the cost to the taxpayer as to the outcomes for citizens. There's been a lot of innovation, I think, but a lot of it has been about forms of service delivery rather than the cost-effective dimension that is now becoming so important. The third theme is the value of experimentation, of having a go, of trying to deal with the pervasive risk aversion that occurs in the public sector and that can in itself pose a really big risk to performance. Because if we don't experiment, if we're not risk takers in terms of developing new ways of doing things, then we're going to be forced to be doing things in crisis situations and doing them on the back foot rather than on the front foot. And to some extent, I'd have to say that we are in that situation right now. But it's also important to learn from experimentation and to be able to spread what works more effectively, including learning internationally. And you'll see that some of the speakers in our conference, as in every year, are bringing insights from public administration in other countries. A fourth theme is harnessing the private sector in the pursuit of public purpose. And that interface between the public and private sectors and how you can make that most effective, I think, is one of the crucial issues. It's not a new one, but we've had a very mixed record in Australia and also in other countries in harnessing that. And I think there's lessons from that, and it's an important area going forward. Another theme is the power of measurement. There's that old saying, what doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. And there's some truth in that. But of course, measurement is a very challenging thing in its own right, and we want to be measuring the right things, and we don't want to be neglecting the things that can't be measured, that are inherently difficult to measure. So getting the balance right in that area is also very important. And the final theme that I've drawn out from John's paper and the whole program that we're going to be going through the next couple of days is the importance of promoting public understanding of these kinds of changes, the need for them, their rationales. Managing expectations is going to be very important politically, there's no doubt about that. The changes need to be explained if they're going to be accepted, and therefore if they're going to be sustainable. And I guess we're all conscious that there have been many policy changes and many reforms in public administration that have not been sustainable, in part because they haven't been properly understood or explained. If I can quote from John Wanner's background paper, ultimately, when it comes to the community, there's also the challenge of, and I quote, overturning the pervasive community mindset that governments can and should be expected to solve every passing problem society identifies. And certainly that is going to be the biggest challenge of all. Well, we can't solve all that in one gathering, no matter how good a group of people we get together and how good a group of people we have talking to you, and no matter how instructive all of that is. This is an ongoing process. It's not starting today, it's already started really, but the important thing is to inform it with as much discussion and information and good research as possible. ANZSOG is committed to assisting governments in those respects, in providing opportunities for discussion of ideas through its research program, and of course through the courses that it provides that many of you will have attended, the courses in enhancing public sector management and public sector leadership, because ultimately success will depend on the capability and motivation of our public sector leaders, because we're going to rely on them to be finding opportunities in adversity and importantly ensuring that political decisions are well informed about the options and about the trade-offs.